Hi everyone. Are you interested in learning how an experience with pathology and an autopsy helps shape a whole career journey? Or how we can tackle fatherhood and thinking about that in pediatrics? Well, you'll be excited to hear my conversation with Dr. Xavier Williams, a current resident in pediatrics at the UNC-Chapel Hill School of Medicine in the Pediatric Residency program. Stay tuned for our amazing conversation and also learn a little bit about his favorite Black-owned restaurant at the end. All right, let's jump into the episode. Roll the music. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Black Med Connect podcast, officially and affectionately known as the BMed podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jasmine Weiss, and the mission of this podcast is to inspire you to pursue your dreams. And we're going to talk a little bit to a phenomenal guest today by the name of Dr. Xavier Williams. He is a third-year resident at UNC-Chapel Hill in the Pediatric Residency program and an upcoming chief resident. So we are excited and delighted to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Man, thank you so much for having me. This is surreal, man. I feel like when you make it, it's when you make it on a podcast. I feel like I don't know if that's true.
You've arrived when you've landed on a podcast. I love that. So we're excited to have you here and to hear more about your journey and what excites you about medicine. And if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about your background and really what drove you to medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. So you let me know because I love to talk. So you just kind of keep me guided if I get off the trails too much. But either way, so yeah, I was born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida, to an awesome mom and dad. For those of y'all that might be watching, I might as well. This is mom and dad right here. Old school
I
stuff.
love it. Shout out to mom and dad.
So, and they still do. But either way, mom and dad, very hardworking, very loving parents. And they themselves did not go to college. But as soon as they had me around the age of 18, they were very dedicated to make sure that as their first child, they were going to, push me and make sure that I was going to reach my full potential. So again, born and raised in St. Pete. And as far as how I got into medicine, there weren't any doctors in my family or, individuals that I necessarily could look up to until I got into high school. So I volunteered in this program called Medical Explorers Program at a local hospital in St. Petersburg. It was a volunteer program. And one day we took a tour of the hospital laboratory, got to go through that laboratory, kind of see what they do there. And I remember my mom was on the tour with me and she said, "Xavier, do you see that person right there?" And she was talking about a young individual. She looked like she could be my age at the time, around like 15 years old. I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know her." She's like, "Well, if she works here and she's your age, you're going to work here too." And so, of course, mom's saying all that. I'm like, okay. A month later, I was sitting in my, at the time, my boss's office, Ricky May Jones, and I was interviewing for a position in that laboratory as a lab clerk. And so they gave me the job and I got credit for it in high school, where I would be able to leave towards the end of the school day for 2 credits. And I would go help process the blood, urine, spinal fluid, all that stuff that came into the lab and send it to their departments and work closely with the pathologists. And it was during those times where I had this very instrumental exposure to what medicine was. And there were a handful of pathologists, one of them who is very near and dear to me, Dr. Kennedy, who basically kind of took me under her wing. And she said, "Hey, have you ever thought about becoming a doctor?" as I was working there. And I told her no, but she kind of showed me the ropes of what a pathologist did. And on top of that, she exposed me to my first ever autopsy at the age of like 15. And when I was in, that's when I knew. I was like, whoa, this is interesting. And either I feel like you have 2 different reactions. One, I'm seeing a dead body. I'm about to throw up. I can't do this no more.
No.
Or wow, this is really cool. And she would legit hand me sections of like a liver or a kidney, and we would weigh it. And she would show me the process of how to go through an autopsy. And I was just fascinated. And so that kind of sowed the seed. And from there,
Wow.
I had a lot of really further instrumental experiences that I could talk about. But
Yeah, before you go on, I mean, I think that's fascinating, right? You were 15 when you got to experience an autopsy, is that correct?
yeah,
That's amazing. That's amazing. And for our audience who may not know what pathologists do, they do autopsies, but they are the types of physicians who take our specimens and help us identify, different lesions, different cancers. They help do autopsies and figure out cause of death. So that's a whole field within medicine, and those are physicians too. And so it's just amazing that you got to have that experience so early and to not only do that, but also get high school credit. So that's
mhm,
a great kind of combination of getting to do something unique and still get credit for it. So that's pretty cool.
yeah, yeah,
So tell
absolutely.
me more. So how did you transition from, did you think you were going to do pathology, or like how did you go from your high school to your college years?
Yeah, so I feel like after I had that experience, I was able to get some training in phlebotomy, where essentially for phlebotomy, for those who might not be familiar, you're essentially the vein finders. You're the individuals who go and draw blood for patients. They call us like the daytime vampires. But anyways, I got a little bit of training, but wasn't officially licensed, I guess you could say, as a phlebotomist. But because of those experiences, I was able to interact with a lot of anesthesiologists and other types of doctors. And as a result of that, I was exposed to just more realms of medicine. And it led me to go on this trip to California later on in my high school career. Long story short, is like a week long experience where you get to be exposed to medicine more. And at the time when I was going on this trip, it was in California at Loyola Marymount University. And I remember when I was there, I was exposed even further into medicine around other individuals my age at the time. And we were able to see what it's like to be a doctor and what is required of you. And it was an eye opening experience. And thankfully, I got a scholarship to go to that, because otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to go. It was expensive to get out there.
Hmm. Hmm.
And at the end of that experience, I'm trying to figure out the short way to say this. There was an opportunity that presented itself because of something that I did, basically looking out for one of the other students who basically could have gotten hurt on a stage at this event. And essentially what happened was the director of the program had saw what I did, basically kind of covering this hole on the floor. And she saw what I did, and she said, well, because of what you did, you basically stopped a person from having a bad injury away from home.
Hmm.
But you've also been very interested this entire time. And so we want to offer you like our first ever like internship with our program. And so
Wow.
that moment really is where like I went from 0 to 100 as far as like the speed of just like getting into medicine. I was able to go to Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, and again back to Loyola Marymount University, where we went to UCLA, all as a high school student, being exposed to these
Wow.
medical schools, meeting very prominent physicians, and serving as kind of one of the coaches in this program to teach other students about what medicine is about. And so that was kind of what really pushed me to say like, okay, I think medicine is for me.
That's so fascinating. And so, what advice would you give to a high school student, let's say, who, may not have thought of medicine before?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I think, many people coming from like Black and brown communities, we don't necessarily have people around us that are easily accessible to be mentored by, unless we actively seek it out. And so if you see individuals, whether it's on social media or even when you're going to the doctor and you see doctors that maybe you would be inspired by or you would like to learn more from, never be afraid to just ask, like, can I be mentored by you, or can I connect with you somehow? It might seem scary, it might seem like something like I don't know this person, I don't know what they're going to say. But oftentimes, something that somebody told me once is you miss 100% of the shots that you don't shoot. And so what that means is basically you like shoot your shot. If there are things that you're interested in and you see people kind of assuming a role that you have not necessarily been exposed to, don't be afraid to ask them to kind of show you the ropes of what they do. Because honestly, it was because of my mom's curiosity that led me to become curious about medicine. And then I just started to ask lots of questions. And in medicine, you ask a lot of questions. So it's a good preparation for entering the field of medicine. So
that's phenomenal. Yeah, you absolutely miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I love that. And so, fast forwarding a little bit, how did you decide, where to go next after your high school years? And how did you kind of set yourself up to say, okay, now I'm going to, move on to the next phase, which is med school and beyond?
Yeah. So finished up high school and applied to a ton of scholarships, got rejected by most, but thankfully got some of the bigger scholarships. And so one of those was the Bill and Melinda Gates Millennium Scholarship. And that really transformed me because as a first generation college student, didn't have the money to necessarily go to college, but that opened a door. And so I went to the University of Florida, the Gator Nation, and loved it there, man. And so starting there as an undergrad, that was another transition. You come to a school where there's a lot of smart people around you, and you gotta try your best to perform. And initially, it was a bit of a rocky transition for me. I remember I failed my first ever exam in math. We showed up to math class. I think it was calculus or pre-calc, and they said we don't use calculators here. And I was like, what? What you mean we don't use calculators in math class? And it was a shocker for me.
Right.
And ultimately, there's a bigger story to that. But regardless, I was able to kind of triumph through that time. And my advisor basically said, if this is too hard for you, just because of one math class and one exam, you should consider becoming a nurse. And so as a first generation college student, I didn't know what to do. My parents were just like, you can do it. And most of the time, especially for most people who are first generation, a lot of times your parents might not necessarily know what you're experiencing, but they know how to encourage you. And so anyways, I switched my major as a freshman to nursing for one semester, did really well. And my advisor said, you need to go back to pre-med. You cut yourself short. And this was a different advisor. This was the nursing advisor. So he told me to go back, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. So I went back to pre-med, and I found this drive of just like, you know what, I feel called to medicine, and I'm not going to let my circumstances dictate my future. And so I went through, caught up, took my classes I needed to take, and grinded hard. I found my community, I found my people around me, and I had to really push through to become, ready for med school. And
yeah. It's fascinating. I mean, naysayers are such a big part of a lot of people's journeys. And it's amazing to me how one person can try to kind of speak over your life in such a negative way that it'll totally change your trajectory. So shout out to your second advisor for pushing you to pursue medicine the way you wanted to originally and not letting that first advisor dictate what happened. So for any listeners out there or people watching, one person is not going to determine your future. Do not let one person, because it happened to me too. Don't let one person telling you what you can't do determine where you're headed in the long run. So thanks for sharing that. Sorry to interrupt, but thanks for sharing that point.
Absolutely.
Are you interested in taking a deeper dive with Black Med Connect? Then join our Black Med Connector newsletter. Each week, you'll hear more about our guests and go behind the scenes to get a deeper dive into their careers. You will get the professional productivity word of the week, and you'll get to see and learn more about amazing physicians doing wonderful things in entrepreneurship and innovation. So head on over to BMED Connect, bmedconnect.com/podcast, and join the Black Med Connector newsletter. Back to the episode.
Yeah. And so, that happened and I pushed through, and then it was time to apply to med school. And this is something that might be helpful to those of you who might be considering this. I decided I wanted to take some time off before I went to med school. I wanted to take some gap years, and it wasn't so that I could just, be lazy and kind of not focus on goals. It was more so I wanted to learn what is it like to be an adult? How do you adult, right? How do I build my credit? What is it like to apply for credit cards and travel? But also, how do I build all of Xavier? Because I didn't necessarily know the Xavier outside of the books. And so it ended up being 2 years with the plan, because mama said, you ain't coming home without a plan, because you can't stay in my house if you ain't got no plan. So I had a plan to go ahead and study, take my MCAT, and then also get involved in some volunteer work. And I applied to medical school, I should mention. So one, if you're doing a gap year, it's okay, even if it's 1 or 2, just have a plan. Make sure you have well thought out plan. And then 2, when you're taking that MCAT, you do not have to give up if you don't do well your first time. I took the MCAT twice. The first time I took my MCAT, my computer shut down 3 times.
Oh, wow.
The first time it shut down, it erased my answers in the section that I was in.
Oh my
and so I had to basically, not submit my scores, basically. So I had to retake the exam. Went from Florida to Georgia to take that exam, stayed with my aunt. Anyways, took it, did much better, no issues with my computer. And then I applied. And when I was applying, I underestimated myself, because I think because of my MCAT situation, I was like, no one's going to take me. But I applied, and I knew University of Florida had a great medical school. And so when I interviewed there, fell in love, and I said, this is where I want to be. And so I ended up being able to go to University of Florida for medical school. And that was a great way to kind of transition into my medical training.
Wow. I would have lost it if my MCAT shut down in the middle of the test. Oh my God,
man! And you had all the people around you like, dang, look, this dude. Oh my gosh. So yeah.
Oh man. So you make it to University of Florida, and what kind of pushed you to pursue pediatrics? How did it go your first few years, and what led you, down the journey to being a pediatrician?
Yeah. So at UF, in med school, I was one of those people, and I still am this way in residency. I like everything. So when I got into my clinical rotations, I noticed that I liked family medicine. I liked, I didn't like surgery, but I liked family medicine. I liked OB. I enjoyed pediatrics. I enjoyed a lot of the specialties. And ultimately, coming into medical school, I knew that I wanted to do a master's in public health as a combined degree. So for those who don't know, many programs have an option where you can do your medical degree or to obtain your MD, but you can also get a master's in public health or another degree in a shorter amount of time. So rather than spending 2 years, I spent 1 additional year added on to my 4 years of medical school to get my MPH. And it was during that year that I had to really sit there and think, what do I want to do? Because I found that during my pediatrics rotation and my OBGYN rotation, I fell in love with both. And it was something about the nurturing environment, being exposed to some of the procedural aspects that can be involved in both. But there was this element of having to kind of guide or steer a family in both aspects. OBGYN, there was a lot of bringing in a new child to the world, but also having complications when a mother has a baby and how that can impact the family. And then in addition to that, as my interest in pediatrics grew, I found that I enjoyed just working with children, and especially the teenagers, providing mentorship to them, because I saw a lot of myself in some of the teenagers and young children that I worked with. And so during my master's year, after my 3rd year of med school, I really focused in on experiences surrounding the family unit and children. And I realized what I really enjoyed was learning all about how I can support children and support ultimately their families as well. But it was primarily the children. So through that and some of my experiences abroad, when I was in Haiti, I did a lot of mission trips to Haiti. I worked with a lot of children there too. And it kind of just all fell into place. I was like, naturally I kind of was gravitating towards having fun and helping, these children who were sick. And so pediatrics kind of fit like a glove.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit more about the family initiatives? I know you have done some work with Black fathers and parents, and can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So during my master's year, I had a lot of time to basically work on some type of capstone or a big project that would basically be a culmination of all the knowledge that I gained and the work that I had done during my master's program year. And what I found was I realized that during some of my classes, there was a lot of information provided about the family unit and how mothers impact the health of children, which is undoubtedly true. I wouldn't be here. I'm a mama's boy. I put my hand out. I say I'm a mama's boy. Mamas impact the family unit, but there is also something to be said about fathers and how important their role is in the family unit and supporting that mother and that child. And so what I recognized was there wasn't a lot of discussion around fathers in the family unit. And on top of that, when we talked about issues of health disparities or outcomes that are maybe different for certain individuals that have certain backgrounds, such as those who are Hispanic or African American, I found that a lot of the information we would talk about was fathers were absent or fathers weren't as available in Black or Hispanic homes. And for me, I'm just like, I think we're just perpetuating a stereotype. We've got to understand, one, what are the stories of these Black, for me personally, in my background, what are the stories of Black fathers? I was fortunate enough to have my dad in my life. And two, what are some of these barriers that might impact how a father is able to be a father to his child? And so with all that being said, I basically did a project where I interviewed first-time fathers, and I tried to understand the experiences that first-time fathers, specifically Black and Hispanic men, had in assuming the paternal role or becoming a father. And through it, I had a lot of conversations with these fathers, many of them young. And there were several factors that I was able to identify in my study that impacted a dad's ability to be a father, whether or not that dad had a father in his life. What are some of the things that social media or the world says about him, even though he's not even a father yet? The world is already against him, and he hasn't even become the father yet. There were a lot of things that really opened my mind to, that led me to kind of start a new initiative, which I can talk about too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's phenomenal. It brings me to the point of your experience and you being a Black male going into medicine. You wanted to think about the angle of fatherhood, right? And I think that speaks to why representation matters so much, because your perspective and you having your father there is the reason why, it sounds to me like part of the reason why you wanted to really make sure you dig into this topic, knowing that there are great dads out there, including my dad, shout out to my dad as well, who are present and fantastic in helping to raise their children and take care of their families. So, are you enjoying the episode so far? If so, give the video a thumbs up. Hit that notification bell to get exclusive access when we drop new videos. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Back to the episode. Can you share more about the initiative you created?
Yeah. So through all the, conversations that I had with these fathers, I realized we need something to support them. And not only for us, so not to look at fathers as a project, but more so to just empower these fathers to not only help them, but to also let the fathers help themselves. And so through that, I did a lot of research about fatherhood initiatives. And I ended up creating an organization called the Fatherhood Huddle. And Huddle stands for Helping Uplift Dads Through Discussion, Leadership, and Empowerment. And so the purpose of this is, let's create a space where first-time fathers or fathers in general can come together to understand, what does it mean to be a father? What does it mean, on top of that, to be a minority? And how do we redefine what it looks like to be a Black father or a Hispanic father? And more so, how do we work on breaking some of the generational I don't want to say baggage, but some of the generational things that can impact us as fathers that our own fathers or our grandfathers experienced. So that program essentially had a group format, like kind of curriculum, where we talked through a lot of different topics and had open discussion along with the fathers and another person who guided the conversations. And then there was an element of mentorship where some of the fathers would actually serve as mentors to some of the first-time fathers in the group, which was a really powerful thing. And providing them with resources from, it's called the National Fatherhood Initiative, which is a national organization that has lots of information and programming to help fathers basically be the best dads that they can be. So through all that, you know, I learned a lot about what does it look like to start an organization? How do you get grants for it? And it honestly, it flourished, and it was awesome. It was probably some of the most meaningful work I've ever done.
That's a phenomenal initiative. The Huddle Initiative, is that correct?
The Fatherhood Huddle.
Fatherhood Huddle. Okay. I feel like everyone should know about that initiative. I feel like it just seems so inspirational to empower dads and uncles and brothers and grandfathers, you know, all the whole community of Black and brown men and men in general who are taking care of their families, because we know our mothers are phenomenal. Shout out to my mom too. She would really get me if I shouted out my dad in this episode, and I did not shout her out. So let's go ahead and make sure we get everybody. So tell me more. So you started this phenomenal initiative. You decided on pediatrics. Kind of where did your next step in your journey take you?
Yeah. So I, very interesting that you say that. So, you know, I had this amazing year in my master's program. I knew that after that moment, I'm like, all right, I'm not going to be going the the OBGYN route. I'm going to go into pediatrics. And I'm preparing, and I'm going through the interview cycle. And as I go through the interview cycle, I had a lot of exciting moments where I was just like, wow, like this is what I prepared for. You know, I've gone through all this training, and now I'm interviewing at these awesome children's hospitals, but I'm trying to find the place where I know that I'll belong. And there's something, a part of my story that I think is very instrumental that I found that I need to be more open about, because it's an empowering thing to other people who might be listening. So remember how I told you about in college that failures can sometimes, you know, it can steer you in a different direction. Well, during medical school, for my step 1 exam, it's one of the major exams that you take in order to graduate medical school and then go into residency. I actually didn't pass by 1 point. And during that time, my grandfather was very sick, and I had it was just very much a struggle to study. I was able to take it again, and I passed. And then I took my second step, or step 2 exam, and I did well on that. But going into the interview season, I was doubtful. I was just like, no one's going to offer me interviews. I'm probably not going to be able to succeed and become the pediatrician that I want to be. And lo and behold, all this work, all this, you know, extracurricular things that I was doing, what I realized was it was allowing me to show and share my passion about pediatrics and medicine on my resume. And I think what happened was, as I went through this journey of interviewing and trying to get into residency, I think other programs saw my passion and saw my my drive to want to really impact the lives of the patients that I would interact with. And so I went through, and my advisors were just like, you might not get many interviews. And I remember when I submitted my application, I got a ton of interviews, and it really silenced a lot of the doubt in my life. It built my faith a lot. And I interviewed, and ultimately, when I interviewed at the University of North Carolina, UNC, I fell in love. It was a wonderful program. It had a true commitment to diversity, and there were a lot of individuals that I could really see myself aspiring to be like. Christian Lawrence and Kenny McNeil Trice are some of these amazing doctors at this hospital that I work at. And now I'm
shout out to both of them.
Yeah, for real. I mean, just truly trailblazing. And on top of that, I get to interact with more people like you and Colin Orr. But either way, I knew that UNC would be a place where I would want to be. And I'm thankful that I matched there. It was my number one choice. So that's
Awesome.
what kind of led me to North Carolina.
Fantastic. I mean, again, 100% of the shots you don't take, you don't get. So again, silencing that doubt is a hard thing to do. And I think it follows you. For me, even it still follows you whether you can do something, even if you have a track record of being able to push through and navigate. It's still that inner critic that says, you don't have this, that, or this, or that. But I'm glad you were able to persevere, because I mean, just think about the phenomenal work you did then, and I can't wait for you to share more about what you've done as a resident. But to those listening, I just say it over and over again: don't let that inner critic even get you, because we need you. We need everybody. Yes. So we definitely need all hands on deck. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Black Med Connect podcast with Dr. Xavier Williams. We had a great discussion, and if you enjoyed part 1, that means you'll definitely enjoy part 2. So join us next week for part 2 of our discussion. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you check us out on YouTube and subscribe to the Black Med Connect podcast channel on YouTube. Or if you like listening to your podcast, please go subscribe wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. Until next time, dream without limits. Bye.